Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another midweek episode. And I've got a special guest here today. We're talking a little bit post-Easter about evangelism and sharing our faith. And I had a super cool conversation recently with one of our college kids, Lilly Brinkman. And I just said, hey Lilly, let's just sit down and talk this out a little bit and take your experience and see if we can share that with others. So Lilly, tell me a little bit about where you're at in life right now.
Yeah, so I'm currently a first year master's student at Winona State University. So I'm in my first year of my master's program. I'm a graduate assistant right now at Winona State. So I coach the women's volleyball, women's basketball, and women's soccer teams in the weight room. I do that every single day of the week, and then just kind of working on my education. And that's kind of where I'm at. Planning to go over to Michigan State next spring for my immersion, so all kinds of different things happening. But
yeah, you're going places, you're interacting with a lot of athletes.
Yes.
And you had an opportunity recently which you were able to share your faith in a way that you never expected. So just share a little bit more about that.
So basically this past Thursday, I had a friend ask me, why does everybody keep asking me if I'm going home this weekend, or if I'm going to church this weekend, or if I'm seeing my family this weekend? And he said, I know it's Easter, but like, what's the big deal? And I said, do you know the Easter story? And he said, well, no, not really. And Infinite can kind of joke around sometimes. So I was like, do you really not know the Easter story? He goes, no. I asked him, do you want to know the story of Easter? And he said, yes. So I just kind of walked him through the entire story, started with Palm Sunday. I really gave the children's Bible version of it probably and modernized it a little bit. But when you're talking to someone who genuinely doesn't know even just the little bits and pieces of it, it was kind of interesting how I had to framework different things.
Yeah, so you started and you just said, like, do you want to know? Which I think that's really, really important when it comes to sharing our faith. Like, we're not trying to shove it down somebody's throat, but just ask. And then he said yes. So how did he react? Like, as you're walking through the story with him, like, what details did you choose to talk about, and what was his response to that?
So I started off with Palm Sunday, and I said how he was like the most popular guy in town, riding in on a donkey. People were laying palm branches down on the ground. Like, he was the guy that day. And then I said that as the week went on, his popularity almost decreased. By Thursday, he had the Last Supper, and I really emphasized how Judas turned his back on him. And so when I talked about how one of his disciples, because I even asked him if he knew about the 12 disciples, and he didn't. So that I had to kind of backtrack a little bit there, talk about the 12 disciples, and then push forward again. And I talked about how Judas betrayed him, and I said, get this, one of his like best friends, Judas, betrayed him for money. And Infinite goes, no way. And I said, yes way. And so then I brought him into the garden, and I kind of walked him through the garden scene, and I talked about how Peter, another one of his disciples, took one of the soldiers' swords and cut off the guy's ear. And he goes, yo, go Peter, go Peter. and so I walked him through that, but I said, Jesus doesn't like violence though. So he grabbed the ear, put it back on the soldier, and healed him. He goes, okay, Jesus, okay. And then
he's tracking.
Yes, exactly. So he's sticking with me. And then I told him how Friday came along, and I really emphasized how he was whipped before he was even put on the cross. Like, they tortured him, they tore his clothes, they were casting lots for his clothes. I really emphasized how they made a crown of thorns to mock him because they were calling him the King of the Jews. I said how he was hung by nails on the cross. And then I also talked about the prisoner who was next to him who ended up being saved and said, hey, remember me when you go into your kingdom. And so at this point he was like, I don't really know how I feel about this Judas dude, but this this Peter dude, I like him. And I said, well, get this, Peter denied him 3 times and said that he didn't know him. And then he goes, no, Peter. And I was like, but get this, Jesus forgives. And so I walked him all the way through that. And my friend Alyssa was next to me, and she goes, Lily, you're doing really good, but I think you need to give days. Like, you need to emphasize that this happened this day, and then 3 days later, and I go, you're right. So I was like, I emphasized Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Friday is Good Friday, and then obviously it brings you into Easter Sunday. And I walked him right up until how everybody was really sad, and I told him how when Jesus said it is finished, like the curtain tore in half in the temple and the earth was shaking, and everybody realized like, whoa, this guy was actually really important. And Infinite was like, his job was, he was following along, and it was really crazy to just have someone like so engrossed in the story of Jesus and just following along and being there with me, because again, he's hearing it for the first time.
Right, for the first time.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of pressure on you when you're telling someone the story for the first time. It's like, I want to make sure I get everything right.
So what were you thinking? Like, as you're telling the story, you've got your friend Alyssa there, which is awesome because we're not alone in sharing our faith. And sometimes having somebody else be able to pause and say, add these details to it. But what were you thinking?
I'm a confident talker. I like to talk. It's part of my job too. So I was in my place of work at the time too, and my boss had walked out of his office and then like did a little walk back. So I don't know if he was just checking things out or whatever, but I noticed him walk past and then walk again. And I was like, oh, okay, so some people are around me listening, but I'm like, you know what? I'm confident in my faith and I'm pretty out there. I'll talk with anybody about it, so it's not a huge deal to me. I'm trying to do a better job of being bold in my faith, even though I'm on a public campus. I mean, I know I'm saved, and I really like to pique other people's interest and help other people maybe feel like they can be bold in their faith. So then I walked him all the way through up until Sunday, and I emphasized how they came to the tomb and the stone was rolled away and he wasn't there, and he appeared to them. And I talked about how Jesus stayed with them for 40 days. I told him how Jesus technically descended into hell to show the devil like, hey, I won, you didn't win. And Infinite was like, yeah, good for him. And I go, yeah, as he should. And then I told him how he stayed on earth for 40 days and then he went up into heaven. And he was like, that was such a cool story. And after that, this was in between two teams, so I had basketball and soccer lifted, and then I had a little break spot, and then volleyball was coming in to lift after them. So once I got done telling the story, then my volleyball team came in, so we kind of had to split off and go our separate ways. And I led volleyball through their lift, and I went back into my office, and my boss Jeff walked into my office, and he was kind of like teary-eyed a little bit, and he was like, that might have been one of the coolest things I've ever heard. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you were out there in the middle of the IWC explaining the entire story of Easter to Infinite, who had never heard the story before, and you were so bold with it and just like out there and walking him through it so perfectly. And I was sitting in my office and I was like, am I hearing this correctly? And he goes, sure enough, I walk out of my office, because I had mentioned how he walked out and then he walked back, because I walked out of my office and you're right there and you're walking Infinite through the entire thing and teaching him the entire story of Jesus. And he's like, that's gonna stick with me. That made my day. And I was like, oh, Jeff, you just made my day. Thank you.
Right.
So yeah.
Because sometimes we think we're alone in what we believe, but then, you talked about your friend Alyssa, you talked about your boss, Jeff, and this is all college.
This is all public college campus. Yeah.
Right? So where's this go from here? Like, what's next?
I feel like it makes me a lot more confident to be able to talk about my faith with other people around the university, because one of my things in high school was, because I went from St. John's to Central, and that's going from a private to a public school, and I felt like in high school I was like, oh, I gotta be careful because I don't want to offend anybody and I don't want to like push anybody into what I believe. But I feel like as I get older, I realize that my faith shouldn't offend other people type of deal. So if I can talk about what I believe in, because in the end, if they're getting offended by what I believe in, that's something that they need to work through. That's not something that's on me. And I've also been doing a small group program where I gather every single Tuesday. Amanda and I go, and we can talk with other people around the community, because sometimes going to a different town, you don't have that community that you've built back home. And so now I feel like I have a community of people that I can talk with. And my other boss, Gunner, he's actually the one who invited me to the small group. He runs the small group.
Nice.
So it's fun. I can go into Gunner's office and just tell him little fun stories here and there.
Right.
And I have kind of pieced together what professors I can go to with certain aspects of my faith. And that's also a nice little kind of web that you can see forming, like, oh, I have this connection here and I have this connection here. And I feel like the more bold I've been about my faith, the easier it's been to piece together the connections. Because if I'm quiet about it, then I'm not gonna know who I can go to and who I can talk to. So just being more bold in my faith has really helped me through college, I feel.
So what about Infinite? Like, where's that gonna go?
I invited him to go to church with me. So Amanda and I go to the 8:30 service at a church in Winona every single Sunday. So I told him, I said, we go every single Sunday, even if you want to sleep in a little bit. They have a 10:30 service too. So I invited him to go, and one of my interns was actually also next to me at the time, and they do a Monday night missionary thing that's catered towards college students. And one of my interns was like, yeah, I went to H2O, I go on Mondays sometimes. And I was like, see, Infinite, you could even go with Joe on Monday nights. So there's opportunities. And so I invited him, I welcomed him in, tried not to push a little bit too much, because obviously you don't want to push them away.
Right.
But I gave him opportunities, and I kind of just gave him options to see if he would want to explore that relationship a little bit more, because he did mention that he was religious up until his sophomore year of high school, but I feel like it wasn't super traditionally followed.
Like, if you've not even heard the story,
if you haven't heard the story of Easter, it's pretty loosely used, I feel like, in terms of how strong his faith was. But I think it would be cool to kind of push him to explore his relationship with Jesus a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think there are so many people who have this vague awareness of who Jesus is, but they don't know the storyline of that. And so you having that upbringing at St. John's, and little did you know how much that was going to influence others as you're just able to genuinely share that. And
I technically started with the story of the Christmas story, because I was like, okay, if you're gonna know how Jesus died, you gotta know how he came into the world too. And he goes, no, I know that story. So he knew the story of how Jesus came into the world, but he just didn't know his going out story. And I feel like being able to track it all along the way, and if he could get to know the miracles that Jesus performed while he was here, and just how much he truly had an impact on the people while he was here, and then also why we still explore what he's done while he's been away, kind of thing. Right.
It's like the door is open.
Yes.
There's more there. You have this relationship with him, so who knows where that's going to go. But I'm super proud of you for the boldness that you have in your faith. I mean, we need more people who are willing to do that, and we're just going to keep tracking and see where that goes. Thanks for being open to sitting down today and sharing a little bit of your story, and we hope that you guys too can have some of that same boldness in sharing your faith. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again next time.